Hello, Mishpacha, it's Courtney, America's Jewish mother, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another Friday Reads. Y'all know how this goes. So, I finished 3 books this week. I'm currently reading 3 books, and I would like to share them with you. So, the first book I finished in this past week was Colson Whiteheads, The Underground Railroad. I was rereading this because I am teaching it in my course on the novel. And this is the last book that they've read for the semester. So I finished this up, and this was a reread for me because I did read this when it originally came out in late 2016, early 2017. And I pretty much enjoyed my reread of it overall. So this is about Cora and Caesar, who are enslaved on the Randall plantation in Georgia, and at the beginning they decide to escape, and they are helped to escape by the Underground Railroad, which in Colson Whitehead's reimagining is a literal underground railway system. And so you basically follow Cora as she travels through a number of states, including South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Indiana, etc. And yeah, so that's pretty much the premise. Also, I have mentioned this before when I've talked about this book, but each state is its own sort of self-contained world in a way. So it's not meant to be portrayed as historically accurate, but it is representative of types of attitudes and beliefs that people held during the antebellum period. But it, for example, in South Carolina, when Cora and Caesar get there, South Carolina has a lot more progressive attitudes, or seemingly progressive attitudes, towards African Americans, and that is, you know, not at all reflective of how South Carolina actually was during the antebellum period, but it is reflective of some attitudes that were held by white people, just not specific to South Carolina. But Whitehead just uses South Carolina as a representative example of those types of attitudes. And the same thing with North Carolina, same thing with Tennessee, etc. So this is a novel that is full of really smart ideas, but because I am someone who is sort of more drawn to characters, I did find myself at various points feeling like I wasn't quite as invested in the character of Cora as I would like to be. Also, because they travel through different states throughout the book, we're introduced to new characters pretty much constantly, even including, you know, up to like the last like 20 to 30 pages of the book. And by that point, like, you should be wrapping up your story. I shouldn't be meeting new characters again, you know? So, you know, I liked this again overall. I think it's really smart. I think it would probably work particularly well for people who have an interest in magical realism or speculative fiction, or who are quite maybe plot-driven readers rather than character-driven readers. So I ended up giving this 3.5 stars overall, and yeah, I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're ever interested in contemporary African-American literature. So yeah, that's The Underground Railroad. The next book that I finished in the past week was William Deresiewicz's Excellent Sheep: The Miseducation of the American Elite and the Way to a Meaningful Life. So this one ended up being sort of a letdown for me because I really liked the first third of it. And then I really did not like the middle part at all, and then Deresiewicz came back again at the end, and the ending sort of lived up to the first 4 chapters for me. So basically, I liked half of this book. I liked the first 4 chapters and the last 2 chapters, and I was very disappointed by the middle section. So anyway, so Deresiewicz's premise, and this is really mainly explored in the first 4 chapters of the book, is that because students who go to Ivy League institutions are so put on the path of success from their earliest days and groomed to be ambitious and successful, they don't really know how to do anything else. And so when they get to these Ivy League elite institutions like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, etc., they're not really able to take full advantage of the opportunities that are there for them because they're lacking in creativity, imagination, even to a certain extent critical thinking skills, And so they're not really able to get the full education that they should be able to take advantage of at these kinds of institutions. So that is a very intriguing premise. And again, I think it's very well explored in the first 4 chapters. But then in the middle sections, Deresiewicz kind of gets into territory like, what is the point of college? How do you invent yourself? Etc. And it just kind of gets into like sentimental, mushy sort of territory. And I'm not trying to suggest here that Deresiewicz is not, that he is insincere in his sentiments, because I think he is sincere, and I think the sentiments that he expresses are heartfelt, but because they're so sort of, I don't really know a better word to say it than mushy, right? Like it's not like this is stuff that's based in, fact or whatever. This is very feelings based. But all of this talk about, inventing yourself and the value of a real education and things like that, like it just came across, even though I'm sure he's sincere, it just came across as sentimental and trite. So that was kind of a letdown. And then he kind of goes into how we've gotten to this point. And the interesting thing to me was it seemed to read to me almost like older generation is complaining about the faults of the younger generation, which is weird because Deresiewicz himself acknowledges that he also is kind of a product of a similar environment as the students that he's talking about in this book, because he was also sort of pushed along the path of success and not encouraged to be exploratory or creative, and basically told that like failure was not an option, right? But he managed to turn out okay, and so I think that, like, yeah, there are probably some of these kids going to the Ivy League that are not going to turn out okay, but, if Deresiewicz turned out okay, probably the kids going to these schools will eventually be okay too. I mean, it might come in the form of a midlife crisis or something like that for them to suddenly take another path, but I don't know, we all come to ourselves in different ways and different time frames. So yeah, I didn't really appreciate the whole like, kids these days sorts of complaints. That just always raises kind of red flags for me. And the funny thing is I actually used to like reading stuff like that, but then I realized I was just sort of seeing more and more stuff like that. And then when I actually sort of traced a lineage of those sorts of arguments, they literally go all the way back to like Aristotle and Plato. And I'm not even kidding about that. So literally since the days of old Greek dead guys, older generations have been complaining about how the younger generations are ruining everything and mucking it up, and yet somehow we've all managed to progress, and no one's managed to destroy civilization completely yet. So yeah, anytime I see like old people complaining about, or older people, it's not like Deresiewicz is super old, he's probably in his 50s. But anytime I see, older people complaining about kids these days, I'm just like, ugh, I roll. So, but I will say he does somewhat redeem himself at the end because he offers a number of solutions for the problems that he lays out about being pushed along the path of success and lacking in your sort of creativity and not being encouraged to explore and things like that. He does offer some solutions for Ivy League schools and other institutions for fixing that problem, or at least making it a little bit better. One thing he said toward the end I found kind of elitist and problematic. He says, I used to think that we needed to create a world where every child had an equal chance to get to the Ivy League. I've come to see that what we really need is to create one where you don't have to go to the Ivy League or any private college to get a first-rate education. And I just found that incredibly condescending and elitist. As the product of public education literally my whole life, I went to UNC Chapel Hill as an undergrad, I went to Auburn as a graduate student, and now I teach at a public, a regional public school. I just found that incredibly elitist because I think I did get a first-rate education. I would like to think that I'm helping my students to get a first-rate education, So I just really don't like this idea that you're only getting a first-rate education if you go to Ivy League schools. That's crap. So yeah, I definitely didn't like that part. But I do like the acknowledgement at the end of this sort of hereditary meritocracy that exists within the Ivy League schools and the need to dismantle that. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars overall because I felt like between the half of it that I liked and the half of it that I felt disappointed by, it about averaged out to 3 stars. And definitely if you work in higher education, I would still recommend this book because Deresiewicz does bring some interesting ideas and insights to the table. But yeah, the whole middle part, I could have done without that. So. And the last book that I finished this week was Ann Petry's The Street. Lindsay and I finished our buddy read of this. And yeah, it was entertaining overall. So this is sort of the story of Ludi Johnson, and at the beginning we see her and her 8-year-old son move into an apartment building that's basically a slum in New York City, and Ludi finds herself a newly single mother and trying to figure out what she's going to do to take care of herself and her son. And I say it's sort of the story of Ludi Johnson because we also get introduced to a variety of other characters, and sometimes we follow those other characters' perspectives in various chapters throughout the text. So even though the back of it kind of suggests that Ludi is the main character, and there's no mistaking she is the main character, but it's just there were sort of more side characters and explorations of their perspectives and side stories than I had expected when I read the description of the book originally. So so be aware of that. And yeah, so this was a good book for Lindsay and me to buddy read, especially because this book is in some ways in conversations with other books that we have actually buddy read together earlier this year, in a happy sort of coincidence, including Richard Wright's Native Son and Gloria Naylor's The Women of Brewster Place. And this is not a book that's really talked about a lot in African American literature. It definitely gets crowded out by other voices like Richard Wright and Zora Neale Hurston and Ralph Ellison, etc., etc. But, you know, Lindsay sort of rightly pointed out that, you know, this is really a smart perspective in a number of ways because Ann Petry is very attuned to the social injustices that really shape Black women's lives. And she points those out in this book very loudly and clearly. And so, you know, I think it's a useful book to read alongside other works of African American literature, especially if you are thinking about the early part of the 20th century, or the first half of the 20th century in particular, because, you know, again, we don't really hear too many voices from women in the first, or at least Black women in the first part of the 20th century. I mean, sure, Zora Neale Hurston gets brought up a lot. You know, I also teach Nella Larson in my course. You also have figures like Ida B. Wells. But yeah, I think Ann Petry probably deserves to be taught alongside those same figures for, you know, just again, this sort of perspective on the struggles that are faced by Black women in America. So I like this overall. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. For me, some of the side characters I would have liked to know more about, and you know, for example, sometimes we follow a side character's perspective and we only get it for one chapter and then it never comes back to them again. I mean, even though they appear in the book, we never get their perspective again, and so I'm kind of like, well, what was even the point of that? So, so that I had a little bit of trouble with, and then I also thought sometimes Petry's descriptions of scene setting went on for a little too long, especially because this is such a plot-heavy book, and I kind of just wanted her to get back to the plot. Because this book is quite long. I mean, my edition of this is 435 pages, and I felt like this could have been shorter, tighter, a little bit more focused. But yeah, again, I enjoyed it overall. It was engaging. It was smart on a number of points. And yeah, I would definitely recommend it if you have an interest in African American literature, and particularly African American literature written by women. So yeah, that's The Street. And okay, on to my currently reading. So I'm still reading Ezra Klein's Why We're Polarized, still really enjoying this. I am 1 chapter away from being finished. I think I'm going to film a standalone review of this book because that was requested. So I think I'm probably going to film a standalone review of this book once I finish it, which will probably be tomorrow. So I'm still reading that. I started reading Anton Chekhov's The Lady with the Little Dog and Other Stories. This is part of my not yet read November reading. I'm only one story into this so far, so I don't really have all that much to say about it, so more when I have more to report back. And I also started reading, finally, Toni Morrison's Paradise, which is this month's pick for Robert at Barterhoard's Backlist Book Club. I am 115 pages into this, and we're supposed to start discussion on Sunday, so yeah, I'm guessing I'm gonna be a little bit late to the Voxer discussion, but you know, it's all right. I'm gonna finish it. So, this is the story of, well, at the beginning of the book, you have these men from this all-black town of Ruby come to kill all of these women at the convent, which is not really a convent, but it is where a number of women live. And then from and that's like the very opening of the book, and then from there you kind of get an exploration of the various women in Ruby and in the convent and how they came to be there. So that's pretty much what has happened so far. There's not really so much a central character, it seems like, as much as the town itself and the convent itself are kind of the central focus of the book. So yeah, that's going well, and like I said, I will finish this, but it probably will not be by Sunday. So so that is it. That is everything that I either finished this week or I'm currently reading. If you have thoughts about any of these books, I would love to hear them. Let me know what you've been reading and enjoying this week. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you for watching, and I hope y'all are doing well and staying healthy. I hope you're doing good reading whatever you're reading, and until next time, would it kill you to call your mother?